Hello and welcome to episode 375 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm good, Andy. Quite excited for this week because we're doing something very different on the show. So the podcast is for everybody, and periodically we do some slightly unusual shows, and this show is one such episode, and it's aimed at teenagers. Now, interestingly, this week I had an email from Mark. I'm not going to read out his surname. Mark and his son Harry, and I'll paraphrase his email, but basically he and his son Harry, who is 12, have been conversing via text messaging, which I wish I could share it because it is brilliant, going back and forth asking about money and taxation. So he was inspired, and Mark shared episode 355 with Harry, which is the episode about the difference between rich and poor. But in summary, Mark wrote that his son had been asking lots of questions about money and how things work, and I thought it would be good for him to listen to that particular show. And the exchange is amazing, and it made my day. And he said, do you have any other podcasts you could recommend aimed at a younger audience? He listens to them when winding down before sleeping. So by coincidence, this week is an episode that is aimed at teenagers. And that's partly because we've got a very special guest in today who Andy is going to talk to in a minute when I go silent. It's unusual that I go silent at the very beginning of a podcast, but things are a bit different today. But before I do, and Andy explains what's going to happen, Mark did ask, was his email mug-worthy? Well, I think Mark's dedication to teaching his son about money and Harry's dedication in learning about tax in particular, I thought was impressive. So Mark and Harry, if you're listening to this, I'll be in touch and we'll arrange for 2 Money to the Masses mugs to be sent out to you.
And you can enjoy those mugs with a lovely hot chocolate as you wind down. As Harry said, he likes to wind down before bed by listening to the podcast. Okay, so I'm joined in the studio now by Rihanna, who's joined us this week to help us out on Money to the Masses, to learn the ropes, see what we do. But actually, what I've found from meeting Rihanna is I'm learning just as much from her as she is probably learning from us. So Rihanna, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. It's been really good to have you in the office. So let's just go back to why you're at Money to the Masses. What is it you're doing this week and what are you hoping to get out of it?
Well, from this week, we are doing work experience, just a week away from school, just to learn what it's like to be in the real world, learning just new skills that I can use in everyday life, what it would be like when we leave school.
And yeah, I suppose I should apologise for putting you under pressure straight away and putting you on a microphone on a podcast. I bet you didn't think that was going to happen at the start of the week.
Nah, absolutely not. But, it's a new experience.
So we'll go on to exactly what you've been doing at Money to the Masses this week, and actually the theme of this podcast in just a second. But I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper because I'm interested, and I'm sure we'll have listeners who have either had children that have done the same or have family members, nieces, nephews, sons and daughters even, that are due to do this in the future. So I'm just interested really, Rihanna, in terms of your future, what you want to do for a job in later life. Have you already got that set in your mind?
Yeah, so what I'm planning on doing is leaving school, going to college, studying some A-levels, leave there and apply to the Royal Air Force, become a Chinook pilot.
A Chinook pilot?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you've set that bar high. And is that something that you've been interested in from a young age? When did you start thinking to yourself, wow, that's something I'd really like to do as a profession?
From about the age of 10, I've always wanted to be a pilot, like aiming to go commercial. I then joined the Royal Air Force Air Cadets, which my views got flipped around completely. I wanted to go into the Royal Air Force. I stumbled across a Chinook. I thought, wow, I want to fly that. It was just something about that.
That's amazing. So early age, interested in aviation and perhaps going down the commercial route, but then your passion kind of took over. You did the cadets and then you learnt more about the Army, the Royal Air Force, and then those two things kind of come together to forge perhaps your future career as being maybe a Chinook pilot in the future. Wow. Okay. So tell me more about the cadets then. How many times a week do you do it? How much of your life does it take up? And do you enjoy it, I suppose?
It happens twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday evening. Takes up quite a lot, like 2.5 hours each night. I'm a great fan of drill and parades, uniform, Wedgwood's smart blue uniform. Really enjoying it, yeah.
Have you found that doing that has made you perhaps slightly more organised and more tidy in your home life?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's contributed to like home life, being a bit more organised, schoolwork, getting that done, or staying on top of things. Take like good leadership roles, looking out for others more, taking on responsibility. I've felt it's developed after joining.
And how long have you been there now?
Just over a year and a half.
Okay, so going on to some of your other friends at school then, so it seems to me that you've pretty much got your mind set, and that's amazing to hear. How many of your friends do you think has got a very clear vision? How many of them have no idea? What's the sort of mix of your friendship group?
Not very many of them know what they want to do. They just kind of know they're going to leave school, go to college or sixth form, not too sure what they're going to study. But some of them have a vague idea of what they want to do, like police or be a paramedic or something, but not really got a clear image of their future.
Okay, and do you know from having spoken to your friends how many of them perhaps are choosing those professions based on their interests or perhaps based on what might pay the most? Have they got any idea of like, this profession over here pays super money, even though I'm not really interested in it, I'll probably like to do that?
Mostly just passion. My friend, she wants to be a paramedic. She enjoys helping others, looking out for people, just generally helping and supporting. I know a couple of people that go for the money.
And so you mentioned money there, Rihanna. I'm interested to know how you use money yourself as a young person. At this age, are you budgeting yourself? Do you get given a set amount of money, or are you still being led by your parents?
I'd say I'm heavily led by my parents. I don't have a bank account, so I get cash, just put it to one side, save it.
Okay, and again, I'm interested, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, only because it's fascinating for me to understand, because I've actually got a daughter myself who's a little bit younger than you, and I'm interested to know the development in terms of understanding of money. So do you, for example, keep tabs on prices of food? Do you understand how much it costs for a weekly shop? Do you know how much, say, your house is worth? Are you over those kind of things, or does it go over your head?
I'm going to be honest, no. I don't really have a concept for value of things because never really been taught. It's sort of something you're just assumed to learn further on in life.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. And sorry for putting you on the spot, but that's exactly the answer I expected, because I think, and we'll come on to it again in a second, that there is a bit of a gap that exists. And so that brings us on, Rihanna, to exactly why you're at Money to the Masses this week, and what have you been doing? What have you been working on?
I've been conducting research about what people my age, so roughly 15, 16, 17, what sort of money questions they have around absolutely anything like budgeting, investing and saving. What are classed as stupid questions aren't actually stupid questions. They're pretty normal things to ask because people these days don't understand what you do and don't know. It's sort of just assumed as it's common sense.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that, because at Money to the Masses, we like to think that we do reach the masses, but we do realise that there is a gap there for the younger generation, and writing articles that are designed for them and to reach them either through their parents or whoever else may be reading our articles. So you've really helped us out this week, because you've helped us answer some of those questions that we've been asking ourselves. And so we actually sort of set you a project in the end, didn't we, where you could actually research this. And, well, it's why you're on the podcast. Give us a little bit more information about the process of what you've done this week.
Okay, so I have been asking friends questions about what they do and don't understand about money, what they'd want to know. I've also come up with questions myself around what I don't know, what I would like to know, how I would like to be taught these, which has ended up towards the end of the week being a guest on your podcast, which I'm really happy about because it's a good thing to look back on as a memory, and it was a good learning experience. Learnt some new skills because this is brand new to me.
Absolutely. And may I say you're doing an excellent job. Okay, so let's bring Damien in then, and we're going to go through some of these questions that you and your friends have been coming up with.
Okay, before we carry on with the show, I've got to say I am impressed, Rihanna, with the whole idea of being a Chinook pilot and knowing what you're going to do. I mean, I didn't even know what I was going to be when I left university. And I put it this way, this job didn't even exist when I left university. So there's a bit of inspiration for other people out there who are young listening to this. Don't worry if you haven't got your career mapped out. It doesn't matter, because probably the job you'll end up doing might not exist at this point in time. So there's plenty of time to work it out. So one quick thing before I go and answer your money questions, Rihanna, can you answer a question for me about Chinooks? I mean, tell me a interesting fact about a Chinook that I don't know, which is a lot because I don't know anything about Chinooks.
The Boeing CH-47 Chinook has been modified to be able to land on water.
Now, I think that's impressive. I didn't know helicopters could land on water. You didn't know that, did you, Andy?
No, and I know it now. I would think something that big would just sink.
Yeah, there was another one that Rihanna told me the other day, actually. I didn't know either. Is that if one of the rotors stopped, the thing would fall out of the sky.
Yeah, so both motors dependent on each other. If one goes, the other goes.
And then you just fall out of the sky.
Yeah.
So I'm impressed that one day, Rihanna, that you may be flying. Doesn't it bother you that you could be flying Chinooks into war zones? I mean, I suppose that's why you want to do it. But anyway, I'll best get on the money stuff. We're not just here to hear about Chinooks all day long. So, Rihanna, I'm going to answer your money questions that you've had and your friends have sent in. Anybody listen to this, if there's a teacher out there, because I know at least one teacher is going to listen to it, because Rihanna's teacher rang me up during the week to actually ask that she was in the office doing anything. And what was her name?
Miss Jarman.
Miss Jarman. So, Miss Jarman, if you're listening to this, Rihanna is on the podcast. This is the episode that I told you she's going to be doing. If people are interested in Money to the Masses doing anything with schools, then do email us in, because we are still trying to come up with plans of how we can do more to educate children about money. So, let's kick off, Rihanna. There was a general theme of the questions that you had, bearing in mind most of these people are aged between 15 and 18, and it was really to do with their life choices. And the first one is around student loans.
Yeah, so the most popular questions I received was, what is a student loan? How does it work? How do I get a student loan? And when do I pay it back?
So we've done a podcast on this in the past. So if you go back to podcast 284, you will hear a whole episode talking about how the student loans system works. But I'm going to give it a quick overview. And what I'm trying to do with this is inspire people to go to university if they want to. So some people won't have a career like you have, Rihanna, where they're going to go hopefully to the RAF. Other people might be decided to go to university, but they're put off with this idea of debt and how much debt they'll have when they go to university. Let me just ask you another question. Have a stab in the dark. How much do you think it costs to go to university?
About around 60 grand.
Yeah, it's kind of in the ballpark. It very much depends, but that is broadly speaking, I think, the number that you'll hear mentioned. And it's because if you add up the different loans that are available to you, it starts to head towards that £50,000-60,000 mark. But what I want people to think about is, if you're a student listening to this, then you aren't necessarily going to be lumbered with 60 grand's worth of debt that you're going to have to pay back and you'll be poor as a result. The way the student loan system works is that there are two parts to it. There is the tuition fee loan, which equates to £9,250 per academic year. That is the standard tuition fee. And the university or college is responsible for setting the exact price of that per year. So if you multiply that broadly by 3, you're ending up with just over £27,000 in total. Now, that is paid directly to the college or university, but there is another loan that you can apply for, which is called a maintenance loan, that's used by students to help pay for their living expenses of being at university. Now, where the tuition fee loan is based upon the actual tuition fees charged by the university, the maintenance loan that anybody gets is actually based upon their parents' income. So it is means tested. So what your parents earn will impact the size of any maintenance loan that you get. So you won't necessarily get the full amount. So there is an irony in this, that somebody like you, Rihanna, could go and fight for your country when you're flying your Chinooks when you're aged 18, but if you went to university, you will still not be deemed as independent from your parents when it comes to the student loan system and being means tested, which does seem very odd, but that is the world in which we inhabit. Now, what I want people to focus upon is that when you take out these loans, and so they can seem sizable if you add them all up, because you can get a maintenance loan as much as £11,000 a year. Now, it does depend on where you're studying. Now, there are details that we're going to link to in the show notes for an article we've written that give you all of the information, but very high level. If you think about all those loans that can be added up over time, you then have to repay them when you leave university. But this is where we need to change the way we think about it, because what happens is you only start to contribute towards that debt once you earn more than £27,295 a year. That equates to £2,274 a month. That's for most people. So once you do any money above that threshold, so the £2,274 a month, you pay a 9% contribution on that amount of money towards repaying that student debt. So if you earn £1,000 above that threshold, so you earn £28,295 in a year, then you only pay 9% of that £1,000 over that threshold, which 9% of £1,000 is £90 in a year. So you can see it's not much. And what it means is that you can actually contribute nothing towards your student loans that you've taken out at all. Because if you don't earn above that threshold, you don't pay anything back. And even better than that, after 30 years, all debt is written off. And that 30-year period starts from the April after you've left university. So basically around about the age of 51, all student debt will be wiped. So if you've been listening to that, what it means is that you can actually take out the loans to go to university, and you could in theory never have to pay a penny back if you don't earn enough. The more you pay, so the idea being that the more successful you are, the more you earn after university, the more you start to pay back towards that loan. It can mean that you can pay much more than you borrowed, over £100,000 in fact, but it depends on how much you earn. The more successful you are, the more money you will pay back. But for most people, you probably will never pay back the whole lot, and it'll be wiped by the age of 51. So the message is that it doesn't work in the same way as a normal debt. So it's a contribution towards the money you borrowed to go to university. So it shouldn't put you off going to university at all. And there are a lot of people and parents who think, I don't want my child being saddled with debts. Their children won't be able to eat once they leave university and have families. That's just not true. The other thing to mention quickly is that if you are a parent who's listening to this, that when it comes to the maintenance part of a student loan, as I said, it's means tested. So it's based upon what you as parents earn. If your child is not eligible for the full amount, so they might only get £4,000, then the way it works is the shortfall has got to be made up by somebody else, i.e. either the student has to go to work or the parents actually give the student the money. So there is no other money coming from anywhere else. So bear that in mind as a parent. You are expected to help them through university. There's no legal expectation. The child can't force you to pay for them to go to university to survive. Their tuition fees will be paid for. They may get some of the maintenance part of the loan, but you may need to help them through it. So that's student loans. What was the next set of questions that you had, Rihanna?
So I had a great number of questions to ask about savings. These are, how do I save but also go out and do things? How much should I put aside for spending and saving when it comes to paychecks? And how do I manage my money effectively now and in the future?
So all of those questions fall into the, what should I do with my money? How do I go out and have fun while being able to save money? Basically, how can I have my cake and eat it, which is what we all did when we were young. And unfortunately, that's how people accrue debt. So the lesson here is that you have to start to learn to live within your means. And that's not a bad lesson to learn, because what will happen to every one of you listening to this podcast who's a teenager, as soon as you hit that magic age of 18, you are seen as like these lambs to the slaughter. That the credit card companies, the banks will all start trying to get hold of you to take out bank accounts, financial products, and particularly credit cards. And the reason they do that is because that's how they make their money. They make profit. Now, when you go to university, you might have a student bank account, for example. Now, they will give you something interesting, some teaser, whatever it is, to try and get you to take out the account. And the reason they do that is they don't like you. I'm sorry to tell you that. The reason they do it is because they know that most people, you keep the same bank account throughout most of their life. And so what will happen is you will become a Chinook pilot with a decent wage and a lovely pension when you get to retire, and then you become a commercial airline pilot and you'll be incredibly wealthy, Rihanna. And then what they'll know is that Rihanna is going to go probably and buy a house one day. She'll take her mortgage out with her bank and they'll make more money from you in that way. So what they're doing is just kind of, like they fatten up the birds that you're going to get in the supermarket and eat. It's kind of like that. They're getting you in and they're going to make sure that they keep you as customers. And by giving you generous products when you're young, trying to get you on credit cards, get you into debt, then you can make profit for them. So how do you save money and do the things you want to? Prioritize. That means you have to decide what you want to do, but you need to try and live within your means. Do not get sucked into the credit card route if you can. I know it's tempting, but always try and clear any debts that you have every month. Now, one of the best methods that I heard for saving for the future and still doing things was actually suggested by a teacher, which is a nice sort of circular piece of feedback, really. So if you get 3 envelopes, you don't even need a bank account for this. If you don't have a bank account, it doesn't matter. 3 envelopes. One of them is short term, one of them is medium term, and one of them is long-term goals. So if you have some pocket money or you get any money at all, then what you do is you divide it into those 3 envelopes in proportions that you decide. So you may be saving for something in the long term. So it could be something like a holiday in a couple of years, or it could be some particular item that you want. You put a portion of your money into that envelope, you put a portion into medium term, maybe something you want to do in the next sort of 6 to 9 months, within the next year, maybe that's something you want to put money towards. And then the short term is where you go and do whatever it is that you want to do with your money and go and spend it frivolously. But by being very deliberate about how you apportion any money that you have, it means that you can have fun, but you can also achieve something in the future. But then you can reassess those goals as you go forward. You might change your mind that you don't want the thing you were saving for in the future, and you reapportion your money accordingly. When it comes to when you get paid, what do you do with your money? Now, there's no golden rule, but if you listen to past podcast episodes, one thing we talk about is the 50-30-20 rule. And that is a general rule of thumb, which you shouldn't get bogged down on, but it's a nice starting point. You put 50% of any money you make on your needs. So they're things that you have to spend on. So let's say you might be living as a student. It's things like your food, your rent, or things you have to spend money on to survive. The next 30% go on things like your wants. So they're the things that you are discretionary spending. So they're the things like maybe the latest fashion or stuff like that that you want but don't actually need. And the 20% that's left over you put towards clearing any debt or saving money for the future. And then that's the 20% that you take and you divvy up in those 3 envelopes that I've mentioned. So that is a starting point. And if you did that when you were young, I wish I'd done that, then I would be far better with money than I was at the age of 21. I could just tell you what happened instead is that I got sucked into the idea of credit cards, and the money advice didn't exist when I was 21 like it does now, and you didn't have podcasts like this, and I got sucked into it and ended up spending money I didn't have. And one thing about debt is you have to pay it back. So whereas student debt, you don't in the long run. Normal debt with banks, the banks want their money back, and if they want their money back, they will make sure that they get it in the long run. So try and avoid borrowing unnecessary money. Also, just to finish on that question, Andy updated an article on the website this week, in fact, about the best bank accounts for teenagers. So we'll put a link in the show notes of this episode, which we update regularly anyway, which detail bank accounts that teenagers can have.
Oh, this seems like a good point to ask you. When should I start saving?
I would start saving as soon as you can, because it's not about the amount that you save, it's about the action of doing it. And so even if you save £1 a week, or you save £20, or whatever the amount is that you're able to save, the action of doing it starts to become a habit. And when you get a good habit, that will last you probably most of your life, where you start to realize that you want to save for the future. Most people, unfortunately, never get into the positive habits of money. They start to have the negative ones, which is, as I mentioned, about spending on credit cards. So when should you start saving? Then I would say today. You don't have to have a reason to save. It's sometimes just good to save for a rainy day.
So you mentioned credit cards there, but another question that came up quite a lot was people don't know the difference between credit cards and debit cards.
This is a really good question. And one of the things that I've worked out that I fall foul of is that assuming certain amounts of knowledge from people in different audiences when we move between people who are older to younger or from different backgrounds, they have different levels of knowledge. So a debit card is when you have a bank account that uses the money that's in the account. So if you've been paid, you use your debit card in the shop, the money comes out of your pay packet. And then when you go to the cash point and look at the cash point, then you can see the money should have disappeared that you've already spent, which was an interesting thing, actually. Rihanna was talking in the office that she hadn't ever used a cash point. So if you're a parent out there, has your daughter or son ever used a cash point before? It seems odd thing to say, but if they don't have a bank account, then they probably haven't. So it might even be worth showing them something like that, because we just assume people know how to do these things. By comparison, I remember being a parent and having to Google how to put a nappy on when my daughter was born. So that just shows you the level of knowledge. When you're a parent, you just assume that that's obvious, but even a nappy, which is the most obvious thing in the world to put on once you know, you don't know unless someone shows you. So it's a bit like using a cash point. You just assume people can do it, but they can't. So do show people how how to use things like cash points or when you pay for things. A credit card is different. So what you're doing with a credit card, you're borrowing money from the credit card company. So it could be a bank, and you're having to pay that back at a later date. So you buy something for £100, you might not have the money in your bank account. You could do, but if you've got a credit card, you could go and pay with that credit card, and then you owe that company the £100, and they'll charge interest on that and make money. So that's the general principle. So what you would then do is pay that money back when you can afford to do so. But unfortunately, because of credit cards and the way they work, you can just keep paying on that credit card up to an agreed limit that you have, and then that's where the problems lie if you can't afford to pay it back. Because the way credit cards work is that they don't keep checking if you can afford to pay it back. All they check is that you're within your agreed limit with them. So you will inevitably have a credit card, because sometimes things go wrong. Your card stops working, the TV blows up, and you might have to go and buy something to replace it or repair it, and you don't have the money from your wage. So you will need to borrow money quickly to be able to repair something, for example. And credit cards are a very good way of doing that, as long as you pay them back. And I know you may be sitting there thinking as a teenager, well, why would you ever use a credit card? There are some other benefits to using them. So some of them offer things like cashback. There are certain consumer protections that happen. So if you use a credit card to buy something costing between £100 and £30,000, if that thing goes wrong, you can go back to the credit card company and say, I want my money back. So you buy a car, for example, and the car isn't ever delivered or doesn't turn up, then you could go to your credit card company and say, I want my money back. Whereas if you paid for it on your debit card and the money came from your salary, you couldn't do that. That's because of some weird credit laws in this country. And I say weird because obviously as somebody who's young, you will find that quite hard to understand. But that is the protection that we have in the UK.
So after talking about this protection of the credit cards, do you recommend and suggest to young people like me we should get a credit card?
I don't think you should rush to get a credit card because you can't get one till you're 18 anyway. But once you turn 18, I would say that you should manage money first. I think if it had been me personally, I would have been better at managing money. And then in time, you will get a credit card because you will probably want to buy a house in the future and things like that. So you will need to be able to show that you can manage credit responsibly, but you want to make sure that the point you take out credit, you are in that responsible mindset. That's my view anyway. And so you have a credit report that details all your use of credit. So I have a credit report and it will show you all my credit cards, my mortgage. If you had a car loan, it would detail that. So what happens, lenders can look at that. So people who you go to a company and say, oh, you want a loan, they will look at that report and see what loans you've already got and also see if you're good at managing and repaying those loans. So if you can demonstrate you're good with credit, then of course you'll be more likely to get more credit. So in time, you would want to get a credit card. There are people who go through life without having credit cards, but the reality is that you will inevitably have a credit card at some point, but there's no rush to go and get one when you're 18.
I had a bunch of questions around investing. When should I start investing? And another question was scenario based. I'm 17, I've got barely any money. Where do I start investing or make my money from?
So this is going to be the probably the last part of this show, which I'm going to want people to be inspired by. So the first thing I wanted people to be inspired by listening to this was the idea of student loans, not to be frightened by them and to go to university if you want to. So if that's your dream, don't be put off. The second is I want to talk about investing, which is something I'm passionate about. I'm going to explain what it is, but I'm also going to explain that how you become a millionaire effectively. So how you can become rich. Now, investing and saving, I know that's something that people probably are wondering what's the difference. Now, if you save money, that typically means when people say it, that they get money and they put it in your bank. So they put it in a bank account and you get an interest rate on it. So you put £1,000 in a bank account, the bank might pay you 1%, 2% a year, which would equate to £10 to £20 a year, which isn't very much in interest. And they take your money in the background and they loan that to other people. That's how they make their money on that difference. So they will actually loan the money out to other people and they'll charge them interest of 5, 6, 7, whatever percent. So they make money by taking your money and lending it to other people while paying you very little for the privilege of doing so. So that's the dynamic of what banks effectively do. But as a person, you can invest your money into other things. So not just leave it in cash. You can invest your money and make greater returns. You could potentially lose money as well. That's the dilemma of investing, because there is a risk involved. So you can invest in things like companies. You are on social media all the time. You're probably bombarded with adverts trying to push the idea of investing in shares or Bitcoin or all these different things. But in simple terms, investing is where you put your money into an asset of some kind, and then that asset can grow in value over time, hopefully, or generate an income. And that amount of money, rather than being 1 to 2% a year, could be many multiples of that. So if you're being fairly sensible with it, you could get 5 to 6% maybe a year. But there will be periods where your money will plummet in value as well, and you could get back less than you put in. That is the risk associated with investing. So why would you invest? Why would you bother? Now, there's a key thing that you've got to understand: inflation. Now, inflation, I don't think it's taught enough at school, and the idea of what it is. Inflation is that boring conversation you have with your parents who tell you how cheap stuff was when they were young compared to what it costs today. That is inflation. It's the increase in prices over time. Now, you will have even seen it as people who are young now in the last couple of years where prices have gone up. You've heard your mum and dad moan about the price of petrol. You've seen petrol prices at garages going up. Inflation is the increase of price over time. There are multiple reasons why it happens. It can be just because there's lots more people wanting something than there is supply of that particular item. Very simply, if there's a pair of trainers that everybody wanted, then people buy them, and if there's not enough of them to go around, the price goes up when they sell them on eBay for even more money. That is kind of an inflationary pressure in action. But in the wider economy, prices do go up over time, and that typically is around about 2 to 3% a year. So the Bank of England, which is our central bank, is targeted to try and keep inflation around 2% a year. So all you've got to focus on is that the powers that be don't want inflation getting out of control. And the reason that is because if it did, we'd all be going down the road with wheelbarrows of money trying to buy a loaf of bread, and then the economy will start to fall apart. And that has happened in the past in other countries, if it sounds a bit far-fetched. But if inflation gets out of control, then the stability of our whole economy becomes undermined. So they want to keep prices at a reasonable level. Just think about what's going on at the moment. We're talking about the cost of living crisis. Prices are rising very quickly, but people's wages aren't matching that. And that's why we're getting strikes, because people can't afford to pay for things. So they're saying, we don't want to work, we want pay rises, particularly in the public sector, which are areas that will ultimately get their wages from the government. So they will want higher wages. So they're going on strike maybe to try and push through higher wages. So you get this crisis that occurs. So they don't want inflation to run wild. If inflation's running at 2 or 3% a year and your money is either under your mattress, so not earning any interest, or in your bank and earning 1%, what it means is that the value of your money is actually decreasing over time. So you're not being able to buy as much stuff with it because prices are going up, but the amount of money you've got is static. If you invest and you own things, then the value of those things will go up over time as well, partly because of inflation, but partly because of other dynamics, supply and demand. Then it means that your money is growing faster than inflation. So you're not getting poorer, you're actually either standing still or you're getting richer. So houses are an asset, for example, that you could own, and their prices go up over time. Then if you sold that house, you've made even more money. Then you've made a profit, and then you are wealthier. And then it doesn't matter the prices have gone up in the interim because you're even wealthier than you were in the first instance. So owning things helps. Investing is that method of owning stuff. So not just property, you can own shares in companies. But there are some very easy online ways to be able to invest money now, which is what is wonderful. We won't tell you how to do that on this podcast because you really have to be 18 to be able to start investing. But having said that, technically, you could have a junior ISA that's been opened for you by your parents where they can save or invest money on your behalf, which you then gain ownership of when you turn 18. So ask your parents. You may have a junior ISA in place, in which case, if you're older than 16, you can manage that money yourself. But even if you're not 16, then you could look at the junior ISA and talk to them and learn about investing with that money, which you will then be able to take ownership of when you turn 18. And even if you don't have a junior ISA, technically you could ask your parents to open one up for you. And if you really wanted to give them the money, which they can then put into the junior ISA for you, you could then start learning about investing even as a teenager. And the other thing I'll just mention, there are things called child trust funds, which were created years ago by one-off payments by the government when people were born. It was an initiative where they put in a couple £100 into this fund for people, and there's millions and millions of pounds worth of these funds that have been forgotten. So just check with your parents whether there is a child trust fund with your name on it, which they've forgotten about, because they can be moved into junior ISAs and you can then use those to start investing for the future. So we'll put links in the show notes so you can read a bit more information about that topic. But assuming that you're going to be investing from age 18, what I want you to focus on then is that you want to start owning things and investing your money and trying to make it grow and provide income, because inflation will make you poorer. It will eat away at your money over time. But that is inflation. So we've got that, okay? The other thing I want you to understand, and if you understand nothing else about this podcast, is compounding. And the power of compounding is the snowball effect. So if you imagine you stood at the top of a hill and it's snowy and you started to roll a snowball, and you see it in the cartoons, the snowball starts to roll down the hill and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. That snowball effect is compounding. That's what happens with money. So if you have £1,000 and you put it in a bank, let's just say for ease of numbers, you get 5%, then that means your money after year one grows to £1,050. You've got 5% interest. Year two, you get 5% on not just the £1,000, but also the £50 interest that you accrued the year before. So after year two, you've now got £1,102.50 in your account because you earn interest on your interest. Now that snowballing effect, because you keep earning money on the money you're earning, as well as the original amount you put in, is incredibly powerful. So I'm going to demonstrate this to you who are listening to this podcast, and this is how you become rich. You can try and do crazy, wacky investments, crypto, all that sort of stuff. They're get rich quick schemes. I'm going to tell you how to get rich slowly, but it will mean that you end up rich. And it doesn't matter what job you do. It doesn't matter what kind of education you had. You're just using a principle. And the one thing that everybody who is young listening to this podcast has that I don't, and that's time. And that's the one thing I can't get back, but the one thing that you have, so don't waste it. So I'm 45. I'm not, I'm 44. Let's not split hairs, but for the purpose of this podcast, we'll pretend I'm 45. So if I said as a general rate of return, I managed to get 9% a year because I put it in some investments like shares, and it was something that was a little bit punchy, and I put £1,500 a month into that investment, I would have £1 million by the time I'm 65. I'd have to put £1,500 a month into an investment. That's a lot. Do you not think that's a lot?
Blimey, that is a lot.
It's loads. For me, I'm age 45, okay? But the problem is, that's £1 million in today's money. In 20 years' time, because of that wretched thing I talked to you about called inflation, that £1 million wouldn't buy me what £1 million would buy today. That £1 million, because of inflation, would only be worth, in effect, about £675,000 today. That's what it would buy. So if you imagine that a £675,000 today, what that can get you, that's what £1 million will get you in the future, because the price of other things in the economy have gone up. So that shows you that I'm fighting inflation, but I'm not really a millionaire. I'm a millionaire on paper in terms of the number, but what I can buy is not what £1 million could buy today. So what I need to do to combat that is I'll put more in a month straight away, or increase it over time. And we can link to a show we did on how to become a millionaire, which I want everyone to listen to because it will inspire you. But I want to give you some numbers as teenagers listening to this. If I instead decide to increase my contributions by 7% a year, because it is a number that roughly works when you do the calculations. If I do it by 7% a year, I could become a millionaire in real terms. So I would actually end up with £1.5 million in my bank account or in my investment by the time I'm 65, which would be worth £1 million in today's money, because that's what it would get me, because everything is going to be 50% more expensive pretty much when I get to age 65. I'd have to put in £1,300 a month now, and then that would increase over time to £1,391 a month when I'm age 46. That's 7% more than this year. If I kept doing that, 7% increasing every year, by the time I'm 60, I'm putting £3,500 a month. But I would basically become not only a millionaire on paper, but in reality. Now, if you were to do this as somebody, let's say you were 18, what is magical is that you've got time. Now, if you want to become a guaranteed millionaire, not just on paper, but in terms of what it can buy you, you would need £2.5 million in your investment by the time you reach 65, because inflation is going to eat away at that money. And if you have 2.5 million when you're 65, that will get you almost exactly what £1 million today will buy you. So let's say there was a house down the road that was worth £1 million and you wanted that. Well, when you're 65, it's going to be worth about 2.5 million because of inflation. So you need £2.5 million in your investment. Now, because I'm going to assume you're 18, you only need to put £100 a month in. So that's £25 a week into your investment. That's getting the same rate of return of mine, let's say 9% a year, and you're going to increase your contributions by 7% a year. So you're going to pay £100 a month into your investment when you're 18. When you're 19, it's going to be £107 a month. When you're 20, it's going to be £114 a month. But even when you get to age 50, you're only going to be putting £800 a month into your investment. But you're going to be earning a fortune by that point, and £800 a month isn't going to be actually that much money, because don't forget inflation. My point is that because of time, you can become a millionaire by just focusing on the fact that when you are 18, that you're going to make sure that you're putting £100 a month into an investment, and you're going to increase that monthly amount each year by 7%. So like I said, it'll become £107 when you're 19. But just focus on the £100 a month and you follow this pattern, you will end up a millionaire. Now, I can't do it because I'm 20. I actually said 20 years older than you, Rihanna. I've actually worked. I'm 30 years older than you. But because of the compounding of time, what it is, going back to my snowball analogy at the beginning, you're at the top of the hill and it's been snowing and you're starting to roll a ball. I'm only probably about 50 yards from the bottom of the hill, right? And I'm starting my snowball, but I've got to try and get my snowball to be the same size as yours when it gets to the bottom of the hill. You're like 150 yards from the bottom of the hill. And so I've got to build a much bigger snowball to be able to do that, whereas you can start with one that you can hold in your hand and let it go rolling down the hill. So the message is that when you start working, start making that tiny snowball and then letting it roll and letting it grow over time. Don't be like me. Don't be like your parents. Don't be like your teacher who is listening to this podcast episode, who is sitting there lamenting the fact that how they're ever going to retire. And one of the easiest ways to do it is just to start earlier. We can't do that. So we've got to start paying more. So the takeaways from this podcast episode are: you can go to university and it doesn't mean that you're going to be saddled with debt, because it could mean you don't actually pay anything back. Even if you end up earning an average wage where you don't pay back that student debt, you can still technically become a millionaire by understanding the effects of compounding over time and starting to invest your money early, which is actually far, far easier and safer than it ever used to be. Do not follow things on Instagram. Do not follow things on TikTok that give you advice about how to invest. Go and read some of the articles on our website that we'll link to. But hopefully I've inspired people, answered some of your questions in equal measure, and perhaps proved that money doesn't have to be boring.
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the many good lessons I've learned from this podcast is just to make good use of your time.
I mean, I couldn't put it better myself, Rihanna. You're going to make mistakes with money. That is inevitable. There are things that are going to go wrong at some point, but make use of the time that you've got, because if you start early, you will end up creating wealth over time. And as an aside, and I'm not going to go into a rant because we've done the episode about the difference between rich and poor, which we'll link to again in the show notes. But one of the things, if you are young and you're listening to this podcast episode and you sit there and you look at people like Boris Johnson, who, as we've made this podcast episode, has just resigned today, and you look at the other people that are going to be in government and you're sitting there thinking they're all loaded billionaires and they're nothing like me because they've all inherited wealth. That is one of the things about intergenerational wealth, that it also enables people to become powerful and influential and actually start to make the rules that govern our society. And if we don't start building wealth early in our lives and also build wealth that can be passed on from one generation to the next, we are going to be the people who are told what to do by the people who are the wealthiest in society, who have known about this trick. They have known about this secret for generations. That's why they all own assets. That's why they own the properties that lots of people end up renting. That's why they own shares in companies that we buy products from. So if you learn something else from this podcast, it's the importance that money will actually give you choices going forward, but it will also give you some kind of influence, not necessarily for just you, but maybe for your kids and their kids in the future. And it's one of the reasons why we have such disparity in society, particularly when it comes to ethnicity as well. Because if you look at some of the people who've owned a lot of the assets in society, they do normally come from one demographic.
Okay, so that's it for this week. We are done. So hopefully we've gained some new listeners this week of a younger generation. Do share this podcast with other people that you know may be interested in the topics that we touched on today. And do get in touch if you've got anything that you feel like we haven't covered or you'd like us to cover in the future. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com for that. So once again, thank you, Rihanna, for coming on and being a part of the Money to the Masses team for this week. Hopefully you've enjoyed it.
It's been a great opportunity. Thank you for having me.
And so, Damien, that's it. We're done for this week.
Yeah, and just good luck to Rihanna with her future career, and hopefully one day we will see Rihanna flying her Chinook helicopter for the RAF. So good luck on everything to do with that. So that's it, Andy. Until next time.
Until next time.